Binge the full week of The Ray Taylor Show ad-free over at inspireddisorder.com/plus.
This is The Ray Taylor Show.
The Midnight Club, Season 1, Episode 9, The Eternal Enemy, is the episode I will be breaking down, talking about in detail. So if you've not watched this episode of The Midnight Club, I would highly recommend going and checking it out over on Netflix, the Netflix exclusive TV show. And if you've watched it or don't mind being spoiled, welcome. As I get into this, welcome. I hope you enjoy this episode. This episode has a story told by Spence, titled The Eternal Enemy, obviously, as each episode is titled after the story that is told within this episode. I will be talking about a story at the end of this podcast, and we'll be talking about what happens outside of the story in the first half of this podcast, as a way to kind of break it up and for it to, so I'm not jumping back and forth as much, to make it less confusing, as it were, as I break it down. So let's get into it. As we left off in the last episode, Ilonka finds out that somebody in the club is now no longer terminally ill. Of course, she assumes that means the ritual works. She also assumes that she is the one that is no longer ill, that she is the one that has been healed by this ritual that she is obsessed with. And it's kind of a bummer. It's kind of a bummer, the Alanka character, because she's our main character of this movie. And I love her intelligence. I love her drive, her desire to find a cure. But this character that she is, these character traits that she has, especially after in the real world, going through and in many ways still dealing with a pandemic and seeing how many people in our society will ignore science and have faith in and believe in these magical cures that don't have any facts or proof behind them, but will believe in them because they are new and different, and it's a way to have hope and not have to struggle with the reality of the situation. And it's kind of a bummer to see that represented in our main character, Ilonka, where she has this confirmation bias, right? She assumes that Julia Jayne was cured and not misdiagnosed. She assumes that she was cured because of this ritual. Again, still could have been a misdiagnosis, could also have been a number of things. There's no proof tying specifically the ritual to Julia Jayne no longer having the same kind of cancer she has. So she has these assumptions, and so much of her driving force is finding ways to prove those assumptions correct, rather than trying to understand the science behind why they may work. She's completely ignoring science altogether, going completely on faith that it is the ritual, and the ritual specifically is what led to Julia Jayne no longer having cancer or no longer presenting signs of cancer. So it's kind of bumming. It's kind of frustrating. And we've seen her butt heads with Dr. Stanton in the past, Dr. Stanton kind of being that voice of reason when it came to Anya telling Ilonka that she should, instead of trying to do these foolish things and trying to fight what is inevitably going to happen, Instead, spending quality time with this person while you still have time. And after Anya passed away, for a brief moment, Ilonka found that clarity and had those regrets that she wished she had spent that time, those last moments with Alanka or Anya, in a more quality way instead of trying to do this ritual that she assumed was going to work, then believed didn't work, and now because somebody is potentially no longer terminal, again believes that not only that it worked, but that it's her. Like, she's in some ways very selfish about that assumption that it worked for her. And it makes sense because the person she assumes the ritual worked for in the past had the same cancer as her. So, but the ritual wasn't, they're not doing the same. It's just, I don't know. There are some aspects to it that I don't buy, and it's just a bummer to watch our main character kind of going down this path. But anyway, we start this episode finding out who it is. We find out that it's Sandra, the Jesus freak, the only other person in the Midnight Club who has blind faith in a thing, right? We have Alanka, who has blind faith in this ritual. And then we have Sandra, who has blind faith in another cult activity in Christianity. So she finds out that she's no longer terminal, that her body's healing, and it's explained to her that it's probably the fact that the last labs, the last whatever the tests that they did on her, the what is it called when you get cancer treatment? The radiation therapy. I'm forgetting what that stuff is called. It took a while for it to affect the cancer, as it were, and since then she's starting to heal. So she's the one going home. It's not Alanka, and she doesn't know yet, but. Cut to, we have Kevin and Alanka. Alanka had just found Kevin in the basement. Alanka had heard these wailing cries in the basement. She went down to check it out. She saw the old lady again, as she's been seeing, kind of pacing around in the basement in that little maze thing that's drawn on the floor. And she goes to confront the old lady, and as she turns the old lady around, it turns into Kevin, which is the second time that's happened. And we find out that Kevin has been having dreams. He's been dreaming mostly of the old man, where, Alanka is mainly dreaming of the old lady, but he has definitely had dreams with the old lady in it, so they are sharing these visions. They are having similar visions. And we find out that Kevin not only is having visions, but ever since they discovered the basement, has been waking up in the middle of the night down in the basement, many times in the bed that's all crusty and nasty and disgusting. Right? So he's been waking up down there. Of course, as he has in every situation, something weird happens, blaming it on the meds, right? Another way in which these characters are just trying to prove their assumptions, right? In the way Kevin explaining these crazy events, that's just the meds, but then on the flip side, you have Alanka just blaming it on the ritual and her magical abilities. So ever since they found it, he's been having the same thing. So Alanka decides, we need to have a meeting. We need to get everybody together. She goes over to Natsuki's room to let her know that they're going to everybody meet in the library, have a meeting. We need to discuss what's going on. And as she opens the door, we see that Natsuki's not alone. Obviously, in the last episode, Natsuki told Amish her story, and he stayed the night. So clearly that relationship is progressing. Alanka gets the oogity-googity-doos, kind of the googly-googlies, as she sees that they kind of most likely hooked up last night. She's like, go We're going to be in the library. Come down. We need to talk. So they're all in the library now. No one else is having these visions, right? Amish explains that there's a phenomenon that happens with people who are close, that they will sometimes share visions, delusions, what have you. Natsuki brings up this story that her mom told her after her dad died, that maybe what Alanka is seeing and Kevin is seeing aren't ghosts. She describes an old lady in this story that her mom told her, and this old lady feeds on years of your life. And some of the other people say, well, that makes sense. I mean, we have, like, this would be the main feeding ground for anybody who wants to suck life out of people, right? This hospice for kids who are terminally ill. So they're coming up with alternate explanations for what they're seeing. Spence not buying it at all. And then Ilonka brings up the secret she was not supposed to share, despite sharing it already with Kevin. She shares that somebody's cured, and she goes right into assuming that it's her. But then Sandra pipes up because she already knows. Sandra's like, no, it's not you. It's me. Right? Which is... This is a tough... Like, I like Ilonka, but in this episode, we kind of... Like, she becomes a character that I like less because of her hard-nosed belief in this ritual, because of her instant assumption that she is the one that's cured, right? Labeling her as the special one that has... She found a way, like, it's kind of an ego-driven assumption in a lot of ways, that this ritual that she investigated, that she learned about, that she did all the research for, she's the one that got the benefits from it, and she's the one that is now going to go home. Obviously, she wants to cure everybody else, but egotistically, she's definitely me. Finding out it's not her, kind of shattering, right? Kind of shattering, ego shattering in a lot of ways. Assuming that the ritual worked, right? It worked on me. I'm the one that's cured. And Sandra's like, nope. And Sandra, of course, the one person involved with the ritual who was the least like invested in it, right? She just showed up to be a good friend. She didn't actually believe the ritual was going to work, like Ilonka says. It's like, you just need to really believe it works, and then it will work. And then Sandra's like, nope, sorry, I didn't believe in that. I have a completely other ridiculous thing I believe in, and I'm the one that was cured. And it wasn't the ritual. It was just a misdiagnosis. The radiation therapy worked, and my body is actually healing. I still ended up being something else. And I still have a lot of treatments to do, but it's not terminal like initially thought, right? Very grounded, realistic explanation of the change of events versus magic and hocus pocus. So, in that moment, also, Sandra we finally find out that Sandra was the one who spoke to Spence through the intercom, right? Trying to create this magical experience, trying to, in some ways, trick Spence into believing in God, right? Like Sandra's attempt to manipulate a situation in one of kind of the worst ways. I mean, this episode... Not only do I not like Ilonka as much, or it's harder to like Ilonka, but also you see how kind of bad Sandra can be, pretending to be a ghost coming back in order to manipulate Spence into believing in her cult shit. So she comes clean about the intercom thing with Spence. Ilonka gets upset and she leaves. Of course, we know where she's running off to, right? She's running off to the one person that pumps her ego more than anything, right? Is just like, you're so smart, you're a bright girl. Listen, you know what's going on. Like, clearly manipulating her, being her biggest cheerleader, running off to Shasta. But on her way, she runs into Kevin's girlfriend is there to visit. She wants to have a picnic with Kevin, show him the prom pictures that she took, have a little picnic by the beach. She asks Ilonka where the beach is. How do we get to this beach? I want to have a picnic with him. And then Ilonka, further kind of cementing herself as kind of a selfish person in a lot of ways, going off on Kevin's girlfriend, right? Almost bringing her to tears, going like, we're all dying. It went to this prom thing for you. He's dying. He's like caked in makeup in those pictures. He's not going to be happy to see these things. He's just putting on an act to make you feel good, and just going off on her, right? Not being a good person, right? Maybe not the best tactic to be jumping in with a person you had one small interaction with. But Kevin shows up and kind of stops her from berating his girlfriend. And Ilonka's like, meh. She runs out. Of course, she goes to Shasta. And she tells her, it's not me, right? I assumed before it was me. And Shasta, pumping her ego before, it's like, oh, I see. You had a bright energy before, but now it's really bright. It's clear it must have worked with you. But she finds out, not me, and that she wants to stay. She's kind of running away, wanting to run away from Brightcliff because she's embarrassed. She's embarrassed. Her ego got destroyed. Her assumption that the ritual worked, it worked for her only, finding out that the one person involved with the ritual who wasn't even into it is the one that was healed, or at least no longer terminal. Like, it's just an ego destruction for her, and she wants to run away. She wants to stay, for a night or two, right? Which Shasta's already invited her to join her non-cult. So, she's pretty, considering Shasta is clearly using Ilonka, of course she's into it. She's trying to continue convincing Ilonka that there is something special about Brightcliff, that the ritual still works, right? She's still trying to push her conspiracy, push her beliefs on Ilonka, trying to make sure she doesn't lose track of this faith she has in these rituals. She's like, listen, it's a special place. Just because it didn't work on you, I know how to make it work. Right? Obviously, she knew. She helped her out already. She knows about Stanton. She knows clearly way more than she's letting on. Just little bits and pieces, kind of letting Alanka know who she is, telling her it can work. And then she's like, you know who I am, right? There's a reason why Shasta knows so much. And then Ilonka comes to the conclusion that's like, oh, you're Julia Jayne, right? You're the person that was cured. That's why you know, right? And Julia Jayne, obviously, there's no proof. The fact that she was cured doesn't prove that the ritual works. It just proves that she was no longer terminal. The explanation for that is unknown. Misdiagnosis, possibility. Some other thing, possibility. So many other things aside from a pagan ritual, a sacrifice, a blood sacrifice working. Right? But Julia Jayne is on, she's not only drinking the Kool-Aid, she's making the Kool-Aid. So she finds out that Shasta is Julia Jayne. Right? She stays. She has a meal, most delicious meal she's ever had. And Julia, Shasta, a.k.a. Julia, is now convincing Ilonka to sneak her in. right? I know how to make this work, right? Because she already has this assumption and belief that Julia Jayne was a success story. So, of course, the success story knows how to make it work. So sneak her in, right? Again, colluding with her, right? She's like, oh, I've tried to get in there, but, Miss Stanton, Dr. Stanton, she doesn't want to share. She doesn't want me to use the special place for my rituals. Cut to Kevin and Spence hanging out, and Spence is like, not saying it, but implying there's the situation Kevin is in with his girlfriend, in addition to Ilonka, and how maybe he should kind of come to a decision about things. And Kevin just, I'm not going to dump her. He's like, I didn't even say dump her. I just said you should figure things out. And, Kevin doesn't want to dump her. He feels bad, right? And Spence is like, listen, you're going to die. So either you dump her now, or you, in, a few months or whatever, she's just no longer going to have you, right? She's going to lose you one way or another. And Kevin brings up why he's constantly continuing his stories, why he doesn't want to end his stories. And he does that because he wants those stories to remain alive and real, versus ending the story. That means that they just become memory, right? They no longer exist. They just exist in memory. And memories fade. Memories can disappear. And it's, in a lot of ways, his denial about what the inevitable is in a lot of ways. Clearly, I mean, keeping people also kind of a way to encourage people to stay alive. Let's take a little break from the show to promote. I figured out a way on my website to offer prints for every single painting. So if you go to a painting, you can buy the original painting, or you can buy a print for everything. Artwork that you don't want to spend $100 plus on, 9x12-inch ink painting on paper, $100 for the original one-of-a-kind piece of artwork. Paintings range in price depending on their size. The 8x10 print, $20. Available in the store at inspireddisorder.com. And now let's get back to the show. There's clearly a connection between him and Alanka, right? They're sharing these visions, the only two people sharing these visions. He's been on her side despite the fact that she's into this ritual he doesn't buy, and he's very much about explaining away a lot of these crazy things that are happening. They're kind of two sides of the same coin, right? They're two extremes going in different directions, but there's clearly a connection there. We clearly see when Ilonka tried to give him a kiss, she clearly likes him, he clearly likes her, and Spence sees the connection there as well. But later, Spence ends up going with Mark. Mark invites him to go to a game night. Spence, in the last episode, after confronting his mom, mentioned to Mark that, it's like, I'm going to go fantasize that I'm going to hang out with my community and go to a party and we're all dancing and all that stuff. So Mark taking that idea, bringing Spence to his community, to the gay community, as it were, the LGBTQ community of people, of friends that Mark has, brings them to a game night where they're playing games, they're drinking alcohol, and they're preparing for a rally, an AIDS rally that they have coming up. And, Spence finally being able to be 100% himself, be around people that know what he's gone through, that understand what it's like to be different in the world, and to be okay with it, and to just be yourself, and to just like all of that baggage stripped away, all of the need to pretend to be something you're not stripped away, and he can just be who he is effortlessly, and these people effortlessly accept him, right? To be accepted and loved without any conditions, unconditionally, something that he's never really had, aside from a lot of the people at Brightcliff. He's never really had people that, like, even the friends at Brightcliff, they don't know necessarily what he's gone through. So Mark finally kind of introduces them to that that life. And afterwards, while they're in the car out in front of Brightcliff, he asks Mark how he got into the activism and stuff. And Mark just said it was a very old friend of his that got him into it. That's, I assume, no longer around. And that we're all gonna die, but we all deserve love as well, right? Just because this certain thing is affecting us, affecting our community more than other communities, and because we're living a lifestyle that is different from this delusional idea that there's only one correct way to exist as a human, it's, Mark, explains to him, it's like, listen, just because there's people that don't think we should exist doesn't mean we don't, and doesn't mean we don't deserve love. So kind of a sweet moment, allowing Spence to experience more of life while he still has life in him. So now we're at club. Sandra and Alanka are missing. A lot of empty chairs are there. Obviously, also the empty chair from Anya. Sandra shows up late. She's the first of the two to show up late. And they all love her. They're happy she showed up. They forgive her, even for trying to manipulate the situation with the intercom. But they're all happy for her. They're happy that she has a second chance at life. So no animosity or whatsoever with these friends, which is kind of sweet to see, Could easily harbor some issues with her lying about things. But they're all happy that she's healed and able to go. Then Ilonka shows up, and she apologizes to Sandra. She apologizes to Kevin as well. Obviously, with his girlfriend, Sandra apologizing assuming that it was her. And then they start the story. Spence does his story, right? He's energized after hanging out with his people. He's got a story to tell, which I will get to that in a bit. But after the story, after club, Alanka stays up. You see her sitting on her bed, looking at the clock, and then getting up out of bed to go let Julia Jayne in. And Julia brought other people, which Alanka was not expecting. She brings 3 other people because they need 5 sisters to do the ritual. They go down into the basement, and Julia is in the center, not Alanka. Alanka assuming this ritual is going to be done for her, but she is not the center of the ritual. It is Julia who is at the center, and she's not explaining it. Like, Alanka's confused, like, wait, what's going on here? She's like, don't worry about it. You got to trust me. You see her mixing blood. Right? Julia cuts her hand and squeezes blood into a vessel. Then she pours something that who knows what it is, bile or whatever, with the blood to mix it up, and then she pours it into the little sake glasses for this 4 sisters to drink. And Alanka's like, wait a minute. Wait, there's no personal items? Where's the sacrifice? What are we doing? She's like, just trust me. Just trust me. And everybody starts to drink. Alanka is hesitant to drink. Stanton comes in, right? Stanton, they, of course, go to take Stanton away to hold her back. Stanton begging Alanka not to drink. Julia Jayne begging Alanka to drink. Alanka, like, hesitant whether she's going to or not. And as Julia kind of crawls towards her to force her to drink, Alanka backing up away from her, she backs into a wall, knocks herself out. And that's how the episode ends, right? Julia Jayne taking advantage to get into Brightcliff again. Dr. Stanton, well aware, right? We know, after Stanton said she was aware all the time the kids would go into the basement. Well, they didn't know they were going to the basement, but every time they would go to the library, Obviously, she's been on high alert considering all of the things that have been going on, considering that these kids already tried to do a ritual once. Of course, she's probably going to do it again, especially considering that, she probably knows that Ilonka's been running off, probably knows that she's been talking to Shasta. Obviously, she's getting this help from somebody. So she was on alert and ready for when they showed up, because it seems like Shasta's done this before, right? Just kind of barging in to try and do this ritual again for herself. And no personal effects, doing the ritual differently than Alanka was told to do it. And thankfully, Ilonka hesitant, right? She's not drinking the Kool-Aid immediately. But yeah, that's the end of the episode. So now we'll go to the story that Spence told.
To those before and to those after. To us now and to those beyond.
To those before, to those after, to us now and to those beyond.
Seen or unseen, here, but not here.
Seen or unseen, here but not here.
So Spence's story, the eternal enemy story about knowing where you're going before you get there, fighting for the future you want versus what you're destined for, because we all know destiny changes, as we've seen with Sandra's destiny specifically. So in this story, Spence is known as Rel. He's a transfer student in college. No friends, but he has a thing for this genius known as Christopher in his school. So in an effort to, get to know Chris more, he gets a VCR in order to record old sci-fi movies off the TV. As many people who grew up in the 90s know how interesting it was. Before the internet and downloading and streaming, you would just copy stuff, whether it's music off the radio onto a cassette tape, or everybody who grew up in the 90s had VHS cassettes that had your written on labels, a lot of times 3 movies on a VHS of all the different movies you recorded from HBO when they had their trial weekend. So he's wants to record these sci-fi movies that he knows Christopher is into off the TV and knows that he would like. He ends up having a crazy sci-fi dream, right? Just these mechanicals, like very sci-fi, like a cyborg kind of a thing. In his room, he had posters of Time Cop and Terminator and Back to the Future. So very much movie posters in theme with this story that Spence is telling. So he's having these crazy sci-fi dreams. And then the next day, in one of the common rooms, he comes across Chris, who's working on a robot that he's having issues with. His robot's broken, and he's threatening to throw it out because it's defective. And thematically, something that metaphorically is something that's happened to Spence in his life. People in his life considering him to be defective and kind of effortlessly throwing him out, whether it's the community of people that he knew in the church or his family specifically, his mom specifically. So he makes a little comment about that, the nature of being defective, and how maybe throwing something out isn't the best course of action. But he invites him to come over because he got a VCR. He's tired of using the one that's in the common room. It's always broken. But he got it to record movies, and he recorded The Terminator. So he invites Chris over to watch it sometime. Chris is like, let's do it tonight. So he comes over. Chris comes over, cut to later on, comes over, brings wine, right? In my college days, didn't know anybody who drank wine. He also brought cheese, but obviously, I guess stereotypes sometimes are accurate in certain cases. But he brings wine and cheese. They end up doing their cheese puns, their Terminator quotes and cheese puns, which is kind of funny. puts on the VHS and notices that it accidentally recorded some news program covering some sporting event that went on. And Kevin immediately calling out Spence for the ridiculous sports teams' names that he gave the sports. And he's like, listen, it doesn't matter. Sports are dumb. But Kevin, being somebody who is into sports, calling it out, as Spence is well known to call people out on their stories. Kevin having no problem calling him out on his for the team names. But back in the story, Rel and Chris, they come to the conclusion that it must have been programmed wrong because, it's recorded something that's, one, HBO doesn't have news, and news generally isn't on at 3 a.m, but recorded wrong. So as a change of plans, Chris invites or recommends that they go to a bar. Let's go to a bar, get some drinks. I'll buy you some bad food. And Rel, goes along with that. So they end up going to a sports bar, get their drinks, sit down, and a game's on the TV. And he's like, I don't get the fascination with straight guys in football. And Chris is like, well, I like football, and I'm definitely not straight. So clearly telling Rel that's like, okay, we're like understanding where they both stand without just blatantly talking about their sexual preferences, but clearly knowing that they're on the same team, as it were. Let's take a little break from the show to promote the benefits of Inspired Disorder Plus. So you go inspireddisorder.com/plus. Sign up, $5 a month. You get to binge the full week of The Ray Taylor Show ad-free. You get to watch all of the live painting videos I do. You get a special members-only discount and deals for all of the artwork and merch that I sell. You also get the complete podcast back catalog of every podcast I've ever produced, hundreds of episodes, countless different podcasts. You also get access to my personal blog. A new blog comes out every week. In addition to that, you get my creative writing that I'm releasing. You also get access to Asking Me Anything. 14 years of experience podcasting. I've been creating art my entire life. I've been using Photoshop since middle school, and you can contact me to ask me questions about that or anything else. So those are the benefits for signing up for Inspired Disorder Plus. And now let's get back to the show. The game is live, and it's the same game that they saw on the VHS. The results of they saw, and Rel keeps saying, no, this isn't live. And the guy at the bar is like, no, dude, this is a live game, okay? And Rel bets him. It's like, oh, this is the game where that guy catches for a touchdown. He's like, that guy's never caught a touchdown. So he bets him. And, of course, the events of the game prove Rel right, and he wins the bet, which is hilarious. Just to step out of this a little bit, I used to be a huge fan of MMA, watching UFC fights. Back in the day, I would go to a sports bar with friends of mine from work to watch UFC events, right? Instead of paying for the pay-per-view, go to a bar, have some drinks with some friends, and watch it live with a bunch of people. And there was one fight that took place in Germany, and the broadcast of that fight card in the U.S. was on a time delay, right? Instead of broadcasting it in the U.S. in like the early AM hours, they had a time delay to broadcast it at a normal time when they would normally broadcast it. So, as a big fan that I was, already knew a lot of the results of these fights, but I still enjoyed watching the fights anyway. It's always interesting to see how those results came to be. And there was one fight where this guy sitting next to me at the neighboring table, this dude is covered in tattoos, like literally had like black rimmed glasses tattooed on his face, his whole head covered in tattoos, right? But also kind of a scrawny guy talking so much shit about a fighter that I knew won. And I threw in like, I don't know, man. I think he might win it. I think he's got a good shot. And this dude decides to bet me I know what's going to happen. Like, we bet pitchers. Loser buys a pitcher of beer. So I was like, sure. Or just buys beer, whatever. So I'm like, sure, it's not a big thing. I'm hoping that nobody else realizes that this bet is going on and that this is a fight that had already taken place earlier in the day. But of course, good fight. I think it went to a decision. The guy that I already knew won, so I got a free beer. And the dude was cool with it. But it was like a situation where it was like easy to see who the posers were. Right? If you're really a big fan, then you know that this fight has already taken place. You know this fight's taking place in Germany. You know that it's a time delay and that you're watching a replay. But in this story that Spence is telling, he has a magical VCR that is recording the future, which is what they find out after they win this bet, after Rel and Christopher win this bet. So they figure it out that it's recording the future, and they decide to do it again. And they use that to start hustling. They go back to the bar and they make a bet with that same guy at the bar who's no problem, this homophobic guy, meathead guy that's like, yeah, a couple of gay dudes want to come in and bet me. They don't even like football. Of course I'm gonna win these bets because I'm way more educated. But of course these guys is kind of cheating. They already know the events that are going to happen. So they do this for a while. They hustle for a while. They get like close to $1,000. And then one morning they wake up and they see that the news that they recorded, one of the students in their school died. And they decide, obviously, they're going to try and stop it. As they go to where it is, Rel sees this air conditioner that's about to fall onto somebody's head. He sees it shaking in the window. And he's running and just in time pushes the person out of the way, played by Sandra. Pushes her out of the way, saving her life. Chris shows up shortly after, scared because, of course, Rel, in a lot of ways, put himself in danger. The air conditioning could have clearly landed on him instead. Chris also notices a guy in the crowd wearing a hood, creepy guy wearing a hood. Later, when they watch the news broadcast where Rel was... In real time, they watched the news broadcast where Rel was interviewed after saving this girl's life. Chris sees that hooded guy in the news broadcast. It's like, oh, that's the guy. That's that creepy guy. So it's at this point they realize, okay, we should stop doing this, right? You almost could have died. Like, I'm going to go. Chris has plans to go stay at his mom's, visit his mom, who's only 40 minutes away via cab ride, so really not that far away. Like they kind of talk about it, he's asking, like, it sounds like he's almost going out of town, right? At least out of town. It's more like cross town or going out of the state. I'm going to visit my mom. No, you should keep your plans. Like, I'm only going 40 minutes. It's crazy. But yeah, he decides, like, Chris is like, just wait until, don't record while I'm away, right? Just take a break from it. And Rel agrees. But it's at that moment you have from the peanut gallery at club, Amesh is like, oh, that dude in the hood, that's death. It's death. And Kevin pipes up. It's like, nope, the dude in the hood, that's the NFL commissioner because of the names that have been used. He's offended by the names that have been used for these teams, and he's very angry about that. Obviously, neither of those are right. Cut back to the story where Rel, alone, you're alone, there's nobody to lie to, and he decides to record. The temptation is too strong. And there's nobody there to lie to about it. And, he can do it and not say anything. Next morning, he wakes up, and the news broadcast is of Chris, who was murdered. So, of course, Rel needs to stop that. Tries to call Chris's mom, but as soon as the phone picks up, there's this, like, crazy sound that zaps his ear, Rel's ear. And even that night before, I should say, when he decides to record it, has another crazy dream where Rel is the cyborg and there's like these lasers shooting into his eyes. He wakes up. Chris is murdered. Tries to call. Zaps his ear. So he decides to just go. It's only a 40-minute cab ride. They've been hustling, got close to $1,000 in hustling and sports betting money. So got plenty of money to pay for a 40-minute cab drive. So he goes. And shows up, gets there, knocks on the door. Chris opens the door. He's like, we got to get out. Tells Chris, we got to get out of here, right? Something's going to happen. And at that moment, this like metal ball, like what you would expect like a grenade in a sci-fi film, comes smashing through the window, landing on the floor, and this gas starts pouring out of it. Both Chris and his mom, coughing, end up passing out. Rel seemingly not affected by this gas, as a laser cuts through the doorknob of the door. This hooded guy comes barging through this door, right, Terminator style. Rel, hiding behind a lamp, goes and electrocutes this guy with the lamp, kind of subduing him, and opens the hood. And he's like, why are you trying to kill him? He's like, I'm not trying to kill him. You are. Rel asking this guy, why are you doing it? He's like, I'm not the dude in the hood. I'm not trying to kill him. I'm actually trying to stop you from killing Chris. And he's like, why do you look like an older Chris? And that's when we find out that Rel is actually a cyborg. Those dreams were not dreams. They were more memories than anything. And he finds out that he was created by Chris and he was defective. I guess Chris just made defective robots. But Rel was defective. And so Rel, in an effort to stop that from happening, decided to go back in time to kill Chris before he makes him, basically. And then the older Chris followed him back in time to stop him from killing himself, basically, before killing him. And you find out that, there's a lot of, like, metaphor going on and stuff, but so he was old Chris, who finds out, right, gets bashed in the head. They find out that the old Chris is also a cyborg. He was the first cyborg, right? And as he was dying, he slowly replaced part by part until he became a new being, basically. And then in an effort to create the person that he loved from his past, create Rel. But in Rel, he had fear. He had the ability to have fear and sadness. And those two things were categorized as a defect. So Chris, older robot Chris, was going to destroy Rel, right? Because he wanted to create cyborgs that were free from fear and sadness. And it's so as Chris is about to kill him, Rel touches. He finds out that the VCR wasn't recording the future. It was actually the VCR was being imprinted by Rel, because when he went back in time, it messed with his memory, so he doesn't remember why he went back in time, but he knew that, to realign with Chris, but he didn't know his initial mission was to kill him. And these random memories that Rel had in his database were imprinting on the VHS. So before Chris has the opportunity to kill Rel, the robot, Rel imprints one last message to the younger Chris that's still passed out. So when Chris wakes up, he puts the VHS tape in, and it tells him everything. Tells Chris that when you get older, you're going to create these cyborgs, and you're going to you're going to create these cyborgs in effort to eliminate suffering and eliminate fear. And he's trying to tell Chris that there is beauty in sorrow. Like, those things are necessary. Kind of very similar to the idea of the Matrix, right? Versions of the Matrix where everybody was happy people just rejected that, and they had to make a world that was difficult because it was a reality that people would be able to accept. And then after the story, so Chris, right, cries. That's how it ends, right? Young Chris doesn't, grows up and does whatever. Come to find out, like all of these stories, they illuminate the new truths about the storytellers, about these kids that are telling these stories. Kevin remembers that the name Chris, and that Chris in Spence's life was the person that got him sick, that he got AIDS from. And Spence is like, and I'm not defective, I'm perfect. And, which is a similar sentiment that he was telling his mom, right? It's like, the fact that I don't fit in your definition of what is perfect doesn't mean that I am. Doesn't mean that I'm defected. I'm perfect. You can either choose to love me or you can choose to ignore me, right? But there are people in my life that love me for who I am. They understand that I'm a perfect human and I deserve love. And whether you want to do that or not, that's on you. So in many ways, the story is very much that. Very, very like clearly robotic. Perfection, defective, all of that stuff. So an interesting kind of an illuminating story from Spence. Clearly somebody that enjoys, it's a fun little time travel story. And that's how his story ends. This episode, like I said, ends with Ilonka being knocked out after Julia Jayne trying to do another ritual for herself. Meanwhile, Dr. Stanton interrupting that, stopping that. And I forgot to mention that all the people were dying that drank the Kool-Aid. I forgot to mention that part. Just realized that. So we'll see what happens in the last and final episode next week, episode 10 of the Midnight Club, the final episode titled Midnight. So we'll see how this season wraps up in next episode.
New episodes of The Ray Taylor Show come out every single day. Subscribe on YouTube and everywhere our podcasts are found. Binge the full week over at inspireddisorder.com/plus. Buy Ray Taylor Show merch over at inspireddisorder.com. Have a wonderful day, everybody. Peace out!
Today is the day where you wake up and you realize that everything that you've been dreaming about, everything that you've been wanting, every goal and wish and hope that you've ever had can become real. Dreams can come true. What you manifest in your mind, you can bring to reality.